Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, September 28th. Tonight, as Atlantic Canada begins its recovery from post-tropical storm Fiona, south of our border, Florida has its own dangerous weather to be worried about. Blasting Florida's southwest coast today, Hurricane Ian approached wind speeds of up to 250 kilometers per hour. The storm is just shy of the most dangerous Category 5 status. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says people in Ian's path along the coast should rush to the safest possible shelter and stay there. He says the assets that Florida has are unprecedented in the state's history, and unfortunately, they're going to be needed. All right, well, back at home, Mary Simon is visiting the Saskatchewan First Nation that was the scene of a stabbing rampage earlier this month. Ms. Simon met with James Smith Cree Nation community members earlier today, including elders. She also visited the cemetery where most of the victims were buried, and then she placed tobacco on their graves. Turning to a new report that indicates Canada may be in a mild recession by the end of the year. However, the report from Deloitte says a tight labor market and elevated savings during the pandemic will cushion Canada from the impact of the recession. The report says rising interest rates and the accumulation of inventories by businesses will push the economy into a short-lived technical recession. But Deloitte chief economist Craig Alexander says unemployment might not rise as much as it typically would during a recession. This is because the job market is so tight. Taking a look at the housing market now, as RE/MAX Canada is forecasting the national average home sale price will fall 2.2% in the fourth quarter. Now, this comes amid sharply higher mortgage rates. The network of real estate brokers and agents says the market is also being impacted by record inflation and broader global and economic uncertainties. RE/MAX Canada President Christopher Alexander says interest rate hikes have provided some reprieve from unprecedented demand and unsustainable price increases across Canada last year and early this year. He says the current lull in the market is only temporary, and boom and bust cycles will likely be a recurring event until housing supply increases. Canada's Financial Intelligence Agency says a wide range of businesses are being used to disguise the proceeds of black market cannabis operations. The Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, known as FINTRAC, is issuing a warning. It says to be on the lookout for various clues that point to the illegal pot trade. FINTRAC says the illicit cannabis market robs public coffers of significant tax revenue. This while profits in the tens of millions of dollars are used by organized crime groups to finance other illegal and harmful activities. All right, well, meanwhile, cleanup is in full swing on one of the biggest environmental messes in Canadian history. About 80 workers are on site at the Giant Mine in Yellowknife. This is where hundreds of thousands of tons of deadly arsenic lie in surface soils and deep underground. Now, this is right along the shores of Great Slave Lake. There's too much arsenic in the mined-out chambers to bring out, so engineers hope to freeze it in place forever to keep it from leaching into the lake. Even after the work is done in roughly 16 years, there's no guarantee that the land will be clean enough to use. Moving to a major announcement by energy giant Enbridge. The company has signed a deal to sell a minority stake in 7 pipelines in northern Alberta to 23 First Nations and Métis communities. The price tag for this deal is more than $1.1 billion. The Calgary-based company says it's the largest Indigenous energy-related deal in North America to date. The deal is expected to bring in more than $10 million a year to communities represented in the partnership. Justin Bork, the president of Athabasca Indigenous Investments, says the agreement will help to enhance quality of life in the communities for many years to come. The federal government is advising Canadians playing in Russia's Continental Hockey League to get out of the country. There are 48 Canadians currently playing in the KHL. Global Affairs Canada first issued an advisory for Canadians to avoid travel to Russia and Belarus on February 24th. This was when the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. The agency says its ability to provide consular services in Russia may become extremely limited. Meantime, the 109th Grey Cup is officially a sellout. Both the CFL and Saskatchewan Roughriders made the announcement on Wednesday. The 2022 Grey Cup game will be played on November 20th at Mosaic Stadium with over 33,000 spectators on hand. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at the cost of catastrophe. In the aftermath of post-tropical storm Fiona, officials in Atlantic Canada are scrambling to provide support to residents in need. This comes as the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador says residents impacted by Fiona can access financial support. It would be between $1,000 to $10,000 depending on circumstance. The Nova Scotia government is also offering financial aid to residents and businesses affected by the storm. In Prince Edward Island, the government is giving $5 million to charity and nonprofit organizations that are assisting residents. It has also enacted the province's Disaster Financial Assistance Program. Meanwhile, concerns are rising over the total financial toll of what's being called the most costly storm to hit Atlantic Canada and whether it is covered by insurance. Well, joining us now to tell us more about the cost of this catastrophe and what's covered is Mr. Craig Stewart, Vice President of Climate Change and Federal Issues at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Mr. Stewart, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks, Nina. Good to be here.
So what is the overall cost of this storm for local economies, sir?
The current estimates are that the storm could cost as much as $700 million in terms of losses. It's early days, though. Claims are just starting to roll in. We'll have a much better handle within about a month of what the true number will be.
Now, that's a hefty number, sir. So how much of that is insured damage? What is covered in this case?
So a good portion of it is insured. Commercial policies, so everything from farming operations to fisheries operations typically have wind and flood coverage for them. So those would be covered. There is municipal facilities, some of which are insured, those will be covered. On the residential side, residential home policies typically cover wind. There are overland flooding provisions in many home policies. Storm surge, however, is not covered. So part of this bill will rely on governments picking up some of those damages.
So considering that storm surges are not included in most insurance policies, are insurance companies evolving at all to improve their coverages, considering that storms and floods and wildfires are becoming sort of the norm here in Canada?
Yes, we've been working really closely with the federal government since 2017, since the Eastern Canada floods, to basically come up with a public-private partnership that would see all types of flood covered no matter where you lived and how high risk you are. That would include storm surge. The task force report on that work actually was released by Minister Blair, the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness, just a month ago. And we're expecting federal decisions about the results of that task force, a response to it, in the coming months.
All right, sir. Well, on the residential side, how can residents know what kind of insurance protection to consider, depending on which region of Canada they're in, while still considering the cost of all of this?
So they should always be talking to their broker or insurance representative, getting a sense of what risks they face based upon where they live and what the options are that are provided to them. We always advise that they shop around. If they don't get the coverage that they want from one insurer, shop around and try to find it somewhere else. Depending on different companies' risk appetites, some will offer overland flood or even storm surge coverage, but and many will not. So really, you need to look around.
All right, Mr. Stewart, for our viewers in Atlantic Canada right now, what kind of insurance protection do those residents have at this moment that they could access immediately?
So wind, anything that was affected by wind, that affected, like if a tree fell on your car or if a tree fell on your house, then that would be covered. It's standard in almost all policies. Overland flood is covered in some policies if you did buy that optional coverage, which means if heavy torrential rain came in, penetrated your basement, that would be covered. So any fire is always covered in insurance policies. It's only the storm surge issue, which is essentially waves coming in, crashing in through the front door. That isn't offered yet. And that's what we're hoping a public-private and national flood insurance program will cover when it's released in the next year or two.
All right, Mr. Stewart, again, thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily and talking to us today.
Thanks, Nima.
Stay with us after the break. We'll be taking a look at Quebec's provincial election. This comes ahead of voting day on October 3rd. We'll be joined by Dr. Daniel Béland. He is a political science expert at McGill University. He's going to help us unpack where the parties stand in the polls, the major issues of the campaign, and how the election is being perceived by the public. Of course, we'll also have more on the major news stories and headlines from around the world after that. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Coalition Avenir Quebec leader François Legault says Quebecers are not interested in electoral reform. Now, that's even though his party is projected to win roughly 100 seats in the 125-seat legislature in Monday's election. This even though it's polling at less than 40% support. But Mr. Legault says he is open to working with opposition parties on issues such as the environment and the protection of French. But at a campaign stop in Montreal yesterday, Liberal leader Dominique Anglade said she didn't believe Mr. Legault's show of good faith. Well, with us now to discuss the state of the Quebec election is Dr. Daniel Béland, professor at McGill University and director of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for your invitation.
Now, as we mentioned, the CAQ has been projected to win a majority. So do you think this election has largely been a battle for second place?
Yes, we are talking a lot about who might form the official opposition in the province. It could be the Liberals again, but the Liberals have lost ground in the polls, even since the last provincial election. We have also Québec Solidaire, which is the left-wing party, which is strong, especially among younger voters and in big cities. And there is also the Parti québécois, which is doing better in the polls than at the beginning of the campaign. And finally, the Conservative Party of Quebec, which used to be quite marginal in Quebec politics, but is now doing quite well. So all these four opposition parties are neck and neck in the polls in terms of popular votes, but we expect the Liberals probably to have more seats because the support is more concentrated in specific geographical areas like on the West Island of Montreal.
Now, as we mentioned, Mr. Legault said he is open to working with opposition parties when it comes to environmental issues and French language protection. But what have been some of the other major issues of the campaign trail?
Well, we have talked a lot about immigration, including controversial comments on the part of the premier and one of his ministers recently. So immigration has been top of mind, I think, in terms of the discussions, really. The environment is a major issue, and the CAQ has been criticized for not doing enough to address climate change. So healthcare is always a big topic in provincial politics, and our healthcare system suffers from quite a few challenges right now. Long-term care is also an issue. So yes, plenty of topics, plenty of issues to talk about during this campaign.
And amid all these issues, what has the overall mood of the election been among voters in Quebec following the pandemic? And of course, now we have the issue of inflation.
Well, I think inflation is a major concern for most people. Participation in advance voting was quite high on Sunday and Monday. So we hope that participation will be high as well on Monday, on election day. But I think, yes, economic issues are very important to voters, and inflation is I would say, a priority for all the parties to explain what they would do if they form government to address this pain, really, that many people feel at the pump and feel when they go to the supermarket and so forth. Also, housing is an issue that in Quebec Quebec used to be, including Montreal, quite affordable in terms of housing, but things have changed quite rapidly. And this has become an issue related to inflation.
All right, Mr. Béland, now just about a minute left here, but what are you keeping your eyes on as the campaign trail proceeds up until the election this upcoming Monday?
Well, I think I will look at especially what's happening in the different ridings where the leaders of these parties are really fighting for their political life. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the PQ, Dominique Anglade, the leader of the Liberal Party of Quebec, and Éric Duhaime, the leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec, are not certain at all to actually win a seat in the National Assembly. So we'll see whether they can actually make a case for that and win a seat on Monday night.
Lots to keep our eyes on in this upcoming election. Sir, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. The EU says that 2 natural gas pipelines were sabotaged. Russia is poised to annex occupied regions in Ukraine. Famine threatens East Africa. And one company reports progress with its Alzheimer's disease treatment. So stay tuned. We'll have those stories and more news from around the world after the break. Forum Daily will be right back shortly. The European Union suspects that damage to 2 underwater natural gas pipelines was sabotage. It's warning of retaliation for any attack on Europe's energy networks. Seismologists reported that explosions rattled the Baltic Sea. This was before unusual leaks were discovered on Tuesday. They were found on 2 underwater natural gas pipelines running from Russia to Germany. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell says all of available information indicates the leaks are the result of a deliberate act. Meanwhile, Russia is poised to formally annex 4 regions of southern and eastern Ukraine. This comes after referendums there reportedly endorsed Moscow's rule, but the ballots were widely discredited, and they earned the Kremlin no relief today from international pressure over its assault on Ukraine. Western countries dismiss the ballots as a meaningless pretense. They say the votes were staged by Moscow in an attempt to legitimize its invasion of Ukraine. Moving to tensions in South Korea, which says North Korea has fired a ballistic missile toward its eastern waters. This comes a day before a visit by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says the missile was launched on Wednesday, but they gave no further details. It was the second missile launched by North Korea this week, and it came as U.S. and South Korean Navy ships are conducting drills off the Korean peninsula's east coast. Ms. Harris is to visit the demilitarized zone separating the rival Koreas during her visit to South Korea. New satellite imagery of one of the world's most reclusive nations shows a military buildup inside Eritrea. It is located near the border with Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. The images back up witness accounts of a new large-scale offensive. Eritrea has fought alongside Ethiopian forces against Tigray ones, and it has denied allegations of committing some of the worst atrocities in the conflict that began in late 2020. Well, conflict isn't the only thing East Africa needs to worry about. The World Food Program is warning of famine in the region. The head of the UN agency is in Ottawa to thank Canada for its financial support. David Beasley says other countries are not donating enough to ward off food shortages caused by climate change, wars, and supply chain shocks. All 3 crises are hitting countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. This is where he says millions could die. Well, as protests continue in Iran following the death of a 22-year-old woman in police custody, support can be seen around the world. Demonstrators have been cutting off their hair at anti-Iran protests in Ottawa. So-called morality police protests are being held around the world. This comes following the death of Mahsa Amini in the hands of morality police earlier this month. She had been arrested for allegedly wearing her hijab too loose. Activists around the world are calling for decisive action to condemn Tehran. Shares of Biogen and other drug makers researching Alzheimer's disease soared early this morning. This comes after Japan's Eisai pharmaceutical company said its potential treatment appeared to slow the progress of the fatal disease. Eisai announced the results late Tuesday from a study of nearly 1,800 people with early-stage Alzheimer's. The drug maker says early results showed that its treatment reduced patient clinical decline by 27% after 18 months of infused treatment. All right, turning to new data that suggests that people are spending more money on dating apps than ever before. The most popular apps like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge are free, but many also offer paid subscription options. Data AI's Lexi Cito says spending on dating services in the first half of 2022 hit a total of $2.7 billion US. An all-electric airplane designed by engineers in Washington state and Israel took its first flight on Tuesday. The plane, built to carry 2 pilots and 9 passengers, was in the air for about 8 minutes. If it is certified as airworthy by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, it could become the first all-electric commercial airplane. Aviation's goal is to show that electric planes are viable as commuter aircraft flying at an altitude of about 15,000 feet. The Royal Canadian Mint is commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Summit Series. The Mint is issuing a $2 coin celebrating Canada's hockey triumph over the Soviet Union. It was on this day in 1972 when Paul Henderson scored the series-winning goal on Russian netminder Vladislav Treshek in Moscow. The Summit Series toonie enters circulation today. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.